Going back and forth about heading out or staying in? With Spotify Premium, you can download and take your music offline for whichever path you choose. Just download and pull up your playlists to keep the tunes flowing from one adventure to the next. Get 1 month of Spotify Premium free. Tap the banner to learn more.
Je vivrai seul loin des problèmes et des dilemmes. Na, 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 na. Si je pouvais, je vivrais seul loin de mes chaînes et des gens que j'aime. Na, 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 na. Si je pouvais, je vivrais seul loin des problèmes et des dilemmes. Na, 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 na. Si je pouvais, je vivrais seul loin de mes chaînes et des gens que j'aime. Na, 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 na. Si jamais je freine et que je ne fais plus de scène, laissez-moi moi à l'arrière pour qu'à la source je me baigne. Ma blessure saigne et le sang monte à la tête. Je reste la même et ce quoi qu'il advienne. Plus j'ai la haine, plus ils me font de la peine. Ma peau n'est pas noire, elle est couleur ébène. Tous est sereine, nous fais-tu juste la guerre? Tu n'es pas parfaite, ton erreur reste humaine. Seul, 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 je veux être seul. Seul. Si je pouvais, je vivrais seul, loin des problèmes et des dilemmes. Na, 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 na. Si je pouvais, je vivrais seul, loin de mes chaînes et des gens que j'aime. Na, 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 na. Si je pouvais, je vivrais seul, loin des problèmes et des dilemmes. Na, 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 na. Si je pouvais, je vivrais seul, loin de mes chaînes et des gens que j'aime. Na, 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 na. Au plus j'avance, au plus je les devance. Tant pis si tu ne suis pas la cadence. Je ne sais même plus sur quel pied je danse. Encore un acte trop frais, ça dérange. La mélodie me berce et me ronge. Chaque mot me berce et dont je plonge dans les profondeurs de mes songes. Je nage, me noie dans la pénombre. Si je pouvais, je vivrais seul, loin des problèmes et des dilemmes. Na, 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 na. Si je pouvais, je vivrais seul, loin de mes chaînes et des gens que j'aime. Na, 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 na. Si je pouvais, je vivrais seul, loin des problèmes et des dilemmes. Na, 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 na. Si je pouvais, je vivrais seul, loin de mes chaînes et des gens que j'aime. Na, 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 na. Seul, 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 je veux être seul.
En ces temps, rien n'est parfait. Hello, guys.
Hi, Aditiji.
Hi, how are you doing? Hope you're good.
I'm good. How are you?
Okay, I'm fine. I'm sorry I couldn't come in for the preparation yesterday, but hope I
Yeah.
can be forgiven for that.
Yeah, that's fine. You're good.
All right.
We're
So
going to
we're on track to start by 11, right?
11 on the dot. So
This will last for
an hour and a half.
okay. This is a panel stuff, right? Am I correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, awesome.
Et je n'oublie pas que si je tombe, je me sentirais comme la seule au monde. Il joue au ping-pong, s'envoie mon cœur. De gauche à droite, faut pas que je succombe. J'ai crié, j'ai pleuré, j'ai appelé à l'aide. J'ai cherché, mais il n'y a pas de remède. Une vie de merde, c'est juste une vie de merde. Mais t'inquiète pas, depuis quand j'ai découvert. Non, je vais faire mes billets et aller de l'avant. Jamais roupiller, faut juste faire de l'argent. Je vais faire mes billets et aller de l'avant. Jamais roupiller, faut juste faire de l'argent. J'ai des frères dans la haine. Faut persécuter la tête. Pas de carte payée en espèces. Prends le game en toute vitesse.
En ces temps, rien n'est parfait. J'ai la clé, la solution et les faits. Si ce monde part en fumée, on revient de tout, même du succès.
J'ai crié, j'ai pleuré, j'ai appelé à l'aide. J'ai cherché, mais il n'y a pas de remède. Une vie de merde, c'est juste une vie de merde. Mais t'inquiète pas, depuis quand j'ai découvert. J'ai des frères et sœurs dans la haine. Faut persécuter la tête. Pas de carte payée en espèces. Prends le game en toute vitesse. And you know, and you know, and you know, and you know. Oh, na 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 na. And you know, and you know, and you know, and you know. Oh, na 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 na.
hearts on our sleeves, see us with all our flaws. The fellowship of the imperfect, the rise of the flawed. We cry when we need to cry, we laugh till our backs hit the floor. We love with all we have to love. Give.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session. Welcome to this Inside Identity 8.0 session. I'm your host for the morning. My name is Kelechi Njoku. I am Deputy News Editor here at Tech Cabal. And today we will be discussing data sharing and financial inclusion, balancing collaboration and sovereignty. Data sharing and financial inclusion, balancing collaboration and sovereignty. Very interesting topic, a very highly packed topic. So now this session is brought to you by Tech Cabal and QoreID. Inside Identity, formerly Digital Identity Matters, is a webinar series powered by QoreID, a digital identity platform that makes it easier for businesses to connect to trusted identities and critical consumer analytics. The platform provides API infrastructure access and consumer insights to commercial and digital banks, fintechs, lenders, insurance, telcos, and utilities for onboarding, sales, and compliance. And Tech Cabal and TC Insights, we are an Africa-focused digital economy consultancy that leverages big data to help startups, investors, operators, big tech companies, government, and other ecosystem players on and off the continent to answer specific questions and implement key interventions. Now, this session is going to go in a very simple it's going to follow a very simple structure. We're going to first start with a 40-minute conversation with my speakers here. And then after that, we're going to have a Q&A. So while the conversation is going on, for everyone in the chat room, please just feel free to drop your questions in the chat box, and I'll get to them in the Q&A session. Now, the chat room will be moderated by Eniola Soshon, who is our event officer at Tech Cabal Insights. She's moderating the chat room today. So before we get into the conversation proper, I will hand over the mic to Ngonya Kalango, who is head of sales for the West Africa region of QoreID, for some opening remarks. Ngonya. I'm not sure what's going on. Looks like Ngonya is not here with us. All right, Ngonya is probably going to join us later and talk to us about QoreID and QoreID's products. So we're just going to get into the conversation, and I hope everyone is excited for us to begin. But before that, let me talk about our speakers on the call for a bit. The first person here is Esige Agwele. Esige is the co-founder and CEO of Verify Me Nigeria. He's responsible for meeting the company's vision and mission and strategic plan for growth. He's an enterprise architect, engineer, and operations expert with experience in building fintech products and leading public sector business transformation programs. He's also seasoned in systems engineering, enterprise and solutions architecture, and business transformation and development. Welcome, Esige. And my next speaker is Adedeji Olowe. Adedeji is the founder of LendSQ, the loan infrastructure fintech powering lenders at scale. Before this, he led Triumph Limited, the corporate VC of the Coronation Group, which invested in Woven Finance, Sparkle Bank, Klein, and Light, among others. He has almost 2 decades of banking experience, including stints as the divisional head of electronic banking at Fidelity Bank. He drove the turnaround of the bank's digital business. He was previously responsible for UBA's payment card business across 19 countries. Alongside other industry veterans, he founded Open Bank in Nigeria, the nonprofit driving the development and adoption of a common API standard for the Nigerian financial industry. And beyond Open AIs, Adedeji works deeply within the fintech ecosystem. He's the board chairman at Paystack. Adedeji is a renowned fintech pundit and has been blogging on technology and payments at dejiolowe.com since 2001. Welcome, Adedeji. Saruni Maina is our third speaker for the morning. Saruni is currently the Associate Vice President of Stablecoins at Flutterwave. Saruni Maina is a product builder come business developer with a strong background in growing fintech products and B2B partnerships. And our final speaker is Ilamosi Ekenimo, who is a data protection expert. Ilamosi Ekenimo is a privacy expert with a multifunctional background in law and legal research, public policy, and human rights advocacy. She's an inaugural fellow of the Fratelli Tutti Political School and the Nigerian School of Internet Governance. She currently manages the SSC region within the privacy team of a multinational technology conglomerate. Prior to this role, Ilamosi worked primarily as a lawyer, advising a cohort of startups across Africa, as well as several multinational tech companies on data protection and privacy within the continent. She also contributed to the drafting of the Nigerian Startup Act, which is the first subject matter specific legislation on startups in Nigeria. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, Ilamosi, Saruni, Esigie, Adedeji. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah. Like I said at the beginning of this session, we are going to have a conversation for 40 minutes, uninterrupted and unbroken. And I'm really, really excited to get into it. And I'm just going to start with a very foundational question here. And I want to hear Esigie's thoughts on this. So my first question is really, so how has digital identity evolved in Africa over the past decade, and what key factors have influenced this evolution?
Sorry about that, I was on mute. So yeah, interesting one. So first, I would say that digital identity has kind of evolved differently depending on the region in Africa. So if you take, for example, West Africa, I would say that one of the ways, and Nigeria, which is obviously a big chunk of that, I would say that digital identity has, the way it's evolved, or the significant way that's a benefit is that today you can actually verify anybody's identity instantly, across many African countries. Now, the way it's evolved, behind the scenes is that one of the drivers has been the need to implement payments, across, I would say, our different countries. We know when we look at the technology stack that the key enabler for payments is identity. And so in Nigeria, for example, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, I think it was BVN. So two differences over the last 10 years is that, BVN is now kind of like the authoritative source for, fintech, while NIN remains government is now the authoritative source for, I would say, security and services. So we have, two, I would say, competing identities. That's the first one. But, the benefit is that you can verify either instantly today. And that's a big change that has happened over the past 10 years for sure.
Yeah, thank you, Esigie. Adedeji, what do you think?
So like Essie mentioned, identity is becoming critical because payment is the primary driver. And I think for most people, or for the identity we have, they kind of push by those who wanted to make sure payments can drive itself very well. But the only sad part is that payment is still the only thing we are using identity for, it hasn't still been woven into the everyday fabric. When I mean the everyday fabric is, even if you come to my shop to buy something, do I know who you are, right? If you want to rent my house, do I know who you are? If I want to employ you, do I know who you are? We still don't depend on those identities today. So it means that data identity has to go beyond the realm of payments, because payment is just one facet of life. It's just one part of life. When everything is woven together, I think people will take identity very well, because can pay me electronically, I can pay me cash and it's fine, right? So it means that if I misbehave, I could do something somewhere else, right? And nobody will catch me. Now, if identity is now woven into everyday thing, it means that if I mess up in payment, I can't get on the next bus. I can't buy some things. I think maybe at that time we say we've gotten to the level of the level we want to be.
Yeah, I think so too. So my next question is for you, Ilamosi. You are a data privacy and protection expert, and I really want to get your thoughts on this. So can you talk to me about the specific challenges operators face when trying to strike a balance between data collection, data sharing, individual data sovereignty, regulatory compliance, and the goal of fostering financial inclusion in the context of Africa's digital ID system?
Thank you, Kelechi. That's a very
That's
long
mouthful.
question.
Yeah.
But I'll do my best to answer it. So I think that a few of the challenges, and I'm just going to run through them very quickly. I think the first challenge for any major player in the financial space, in the fintech space, in Africa generally, is a variance in our data protection laws. We have 54 different countries, and I think out of the 54, only 35 have data protection laws, and all of them have their own peculiarities. So while in other regions, for example, if in Europe, we have the GDPR, which is one legislation. In the US, we also have one legislation that everybody can modify accordingly. So in the different regions, there are key legislations that form the core of data protection within those regions. In Africa, we don't have that. So we have a few documents. We have, for example, the Malabo Convention, but we don't have any sole document that regulates data protection. That's the core, the grounding thing for data protection in Africa. So the first challenge that they're going to face is the variance in data protection laws. Compliance in Nigeria is different from compliance in Ghana, in Kenya, in South Africa. So I think that's the first problem anybody's going to face. The second problem, I think, is that there is a lack of harmony or a lack of harmonization between regulators within the space. So for example, in Nigeria today, the CBN could make a regulation that has data protection provisions, which might be contrary to the Data Protection Act, and the NDPC, which is the National Data Protection Commission, could make its own regulations that might be contrary to what CBN has already provided for. So we always, and we know the infamous battle between the CBN and SEC, that's I think is still ongoing. So there's the lack of harmony, there's the variance in laws between regulators, just for them to agree on the specifics. I think those are two big challenges that operators in the space will face in trying to foster financial inclusion as regards data protection. Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much. So I want to stay on that for a bit, the part where you talked about, regional or continent-wide data protection laws, right? So we have something that works for Europe, we have something that works for the US. So are you saying that the only way, or perhaps the more practical way, given the circumstances we are in, for data protection laws to work is if they cover these wide, continent-based regions? Like, if we can have different data protection laws unifying different continents, why can't we just have them why can't different countries just have their own data protection laws?
Yeah. So, and thank you for that question. I don't think that there has to be one law like everybody has to adopt, but some harmony would be good. So if there was harmony on basic principles, for example, just to bring everybody into the conversation, banking, international banking, if you wanted to transfer money across borders, that would involve some sort of information transfer across borders. So in data protection, those are called cross-border data flows, right? Or cross-border data transfers, how you transfer data across countries or across borders. the laws that govern that in the different states in the different countries rather in Africa are very different. So all the laws don't have to be the same, but if there was some harmonization whereby key provisions were the same or very similar. So for example, you might say, okay, to transfer data across borders, we have to meet these 5 basic criteria. You can have additional criteria. You can maybe take away and have only 4 or 3 criteria. But if you had those basic things, then everybody knows, okay, in our laws, we have to put these 5 basic things there at least at a minimum. And if you're going to exclude one of them, you have a good reason for doing so. In that way, when actors are coming into the space in Africa, then they know that, okay, if I have these 5 basic things, I'm good to go. In some places, in some other countries, there might be some peculiarities I have to adjust to, but I don't have to change my model of operation, my business model every single time I move to a new African country. So I think just some harmonization would be good, ideally through one document. But if that's not possible, it would be nice just to have, a similar thread across all the laws in Africa so that people know what to expect.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So Saruni, Ilamosi has spoken quite well about regulations and how it's important for there to be some harmony in regulations across regions, whether we're looking at these regions on a continental basis or more fragmented in a country based basis. And I want to get your opinion about the significant regulatory considerations that operators need to keep in mind when working with digital identity systems in Africa. What should they pay attention to?
So first of all, I just have to completely agree with what Lamosi said. The biggest challenge that we face within the continent is that Africa is not a country. We always hear the statement where someone says, "Oh, I went to Africa," and we always fight with them. No, Africa is not a country. But I really think when it comes to regulation, for things to really work, we kind of have to operate like a country, because that's what we've seen, especially the European side do, and things have really worked for them, because it's really such a headache that if you want to do X in Kenya, you cannot really copy paste that in Nigeria or Uganda because you're going to be met with different regulations. So I just wanted to echo that and say that is totally what I would have actually said as well. And then now when it comes to so here it is. I think data protection, storage, and data sharing is one of the most important aspects to look into for any of the operators. And this also touches on with what Ilamosi had talked about, So if you are collecting this type, let's say, for example, SEC in a particular country allows you or mandates you to collect this type of data. But then the central bank of that country also says you need to collect this other type of data. And then the data protection law in that same country says, oh, no, you cannot collect that data because it's against the privacy. So I feel like, our agencies as well, and it's so funny that, you mentioned this because similar thing is also happening in Kenya, whereby we have data protection laws. And some of the things that we see from our central bank as requirements contradict the data protection laws. So you're like, okay, can you guys go sit together and just talk? And then once you've agreed on what you want to do, come tell us now as operators, this is how we're going to move forward. So I think the biggest challenge has become, data protection and data sharing and also data storage, because it's the buzzword right now, if I may call it that way, whereby every region, every regulator is trying to get into it, especially after GDPR happened. It really became a thing. Everyone was like, okay, we can also have our thing where we protect our consumers. We mandate that any player who's coming into our country needs to store data in a particular way, needs to do this, needs to collect this kind of data, especially when it comes to finances, right? You need to know who your customer is. You need to know where they live. You need to know where the money is coming from. All of these kind of things. And then in some data protection laws, they'll say, oh, no, you can't collect someone's location because there's this and this. And then there's the other aspect where as operators, we are trying to make it easy for our customers. So in some cases, instead of me asking a customer, tell me where you live, give me your address, I'll just ping the location through their phone. Like that could make it easier for them. But then again, there's data protection laws that go against that. And then there's the other aspect of customers are liars. And that's the whole truth. A customer can tell you that I'm living at this particular house. This is my address and this is my name. And you know very well that none of those details are actually correct. So I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we actually face. And I just wish that we could be a bit more harmonized in terms of how we do data protection and data sharing within the country. It would make things so much easier because Africa in itself, African countries, honestly speaking, apart from the Nigerian market and Ethiopia maybe, the rest of the African markets are pretty small. So it's not feasible for any company to just stay in one country and say, hey, I will prosper in this country and I'm good. How we are able to see progress is by expanding. And we've seen this a lot within the fintech space, whereby we're seeing a lot of startups actually have to expand, either Nigerian startups expanding into Kenya, Kenyan startups expanding into Ethiopia, into Nigeria as well, into the East African countries. That is how we measure our growth within the African continent because of how small our markets are. And that's a conversation for another day. So now imagine how much of a headache it is, for Adedeji to probably expand his product from Nigeria all the way to Kenya. It literally has to kind of remake the whole process, have to start from the ground up and everything. So I just wish that things were actually easier in that sense. And then it would actually help us tackle this one problem of data sharing and data collection in respect to actually how we do digital IDs.
Yeah, fantastic. So Adedeji, I'd love your thoughts here as well. So what are the significant regulatory considerations that you think operators need to be on top of when dealing with digital identity systems in Africa?
Oh, thanks. Okay, so digital identity is kind of like Ilamasi mentioned, it's kind of fragmented. So Africa, you have 55 countries, right? And if each of those 55 countries, you probably have at the minimum 2 types of ID system across. And but we have to be pragmatic about a few things, right? There's never going to be a time when you have a national ID. Ilamasi, let me break your heart. That's not going to happen. And reason being that countries are always extremely very emotional and probably also realistic about ID. The guy that owns your ID owns your life. No country is ever going to hand over ID to any company to manage for them. That's also not going to happen. So when we put these pragmatic things at the back of our mind, then the next thing we'll ask is then, so what then can we do? So for example, in Nigeria today, in terms of ID, okay, there's national ID, there's BVN, there's voter's card, there's driver's license, there's international passport. All of them are all valid. That's like 5. If you stroll into Kenya, you probably see a ton of that as well. Now, instead of trying to create a new type of ID and bringing companies forward to say, oh, I can do it better than the next guy, which is nobody's going to listen to you. I think the pragmatic thing that could happen would be companies by themselves or a group of companies coming together to build a super ID on top of these IDs. That's the best way to move forward. That's the only way I would say, is the least friction. Because, like I mentioned, nothing good to happen. So if I create a super ID on top of this, it means, for example, I'm in Nigeria, I could have one ID that identifies me as a person for real. And then I have my sub IDs, whether it's my BVN attached to it. If I also now happen to move to South Africa, I could tie my ID in South Africa to that. So basically, if I then want to identify myself, I could start with that super ID, and then the operator this time around could provide more IDs behind that to answer. But if you're expecting that one day a company will do that, or the African continent will answer, because if you bring all the AU leaders and say, okay, we want to have single ID for Africa, so which country's standard are we going to use? That's like conversation for like 2 years. Or who's going to implement it, right? Is it going to be my president's cousin that will do it? That's another 3 years. You could stay there for the next 20 years and it's never going to happen. So I feel this is more pragmatic. Now, but then that is also going to raise an issue where, let's say, there are some companies that may probably never be able to pull that off. Let's say you work at Meta, you can't pull that off because basically the regulators will come at you. So somebody will also do it, and it's always going to be like some regulatory issue. This guy is too powerful and the rest of them. And then you also have underlying issue, rules and regulations and laws that are kind of funny. So let me give you a typical example. A lot of Nigerians or a lot of Africans have dual nationality, right? So if any of your, irrespective of the ID, once somebody is an EU citizen, right? It can even be fourth citizenship, nobody cares. Automatically, you have to do things in line with GDPR. which becomes a problem for a lot of people. And I don't know how many African identity providers that can operate. They can operate at that level, but the significant burden is a lot. And by the time they try to pass that kind of cost to those who want to do the ID, it becomes another level of problem. As you speak right now, Meta, you don't have STRED in EU because of the issues, right? It's some part of open ChatGPT doesn't work in the EU because of data issues as well. These things are becoming real problems. So those are my own thoughts.
Thank you very much, Adedeji. So before I just ask my next question, I'll just a reminder to everyone joining us in the chat room. Thank you very much for joining us. Please remember that you can ask your questions. You can just drop your questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat room, in the Q&A box. And during the Q&A section, I'm going to take your questions and our speakers are going to answer them. Thank you. Esigie, how can technology be leveraged to solve the complexities around data sharing and data sovereignty within digital identity frameworks?
So, it's a great question, and obviously technology should be leveraged and can be leveraged, but I would actually pose a different view on that. And I think a lot of times we don't look at the non-technology part of implementing technology, right? And so when you talk about data sharing, the problem we have is not technology. The problem we have is regulation, right? And you can build the technology, right? But a government coming together to say, who are the authoritative sources of what types of data? How do we use the information to protect Nigerian businesses? How does it connect to our NDPR so everybody stays compliant? What is the end-to-end value chain of being able to use all of this data? In many countries, they have fraud reporting acts, credit reporting acts, different types of acts. And I think a lot of times, when we talk about technology, we always want to jump to start talking about technology, right? And we don't really realize that before you start talking about technology, you even need to understand the philosophy behind why you want to have the technology, right? And document and understand that, and see the regulation that you're going to put around that technology as stimulus, right? Not as hurdles and challenges. How do I put regulation to stimulate a local economy and protect my digital sovereignty at the same time? These are really the conversations that the government needs to be having. So the government needs to be having non-technological technology questions, conversations, right? Really, for us to be successful and really stop particularly focusing on technology itself. And then private sector can, be happy and feel confident investing in building technology because the government has put proper regulation in place.
Yeah, thank you, Esigie. Sorry. Ilamosi, what do you think about this? Do you think that there's any way we can use technology to solve these complexities around data sharing and data sovereignty?
Unfortunately, I have to agree with Esigie. I think that there's sufficient technology, and if there isn't sufficient technology will evolve to cover any gaps that exist. What we have a problem with is regulation. Regulation is the most important thing. So if we could focus, because for example, now, if you wanted to transfer data, like I mentioned, it's the regulations that are the problem. If you wanted to store data in a particular way, it's the regulations that are the problem. So it would be great if we could focus more on the regulation part to ensure that data sharing is seamless for fintech organizations and other financial organizations.
Yeah. So I want to stay on the topic of, so now I want to just pivot just a bit to, we've been talking a lot about regulation and technology and all of that, but now I want to think about the people whose data we are collecting or whose data we're promising to protect and to not share. Now, there is a question of, there's the issue of trust. Okay, people have to, when we're talking about collecting people's data, trust is a big issue. So now I want to understand, Ilamosi, what steps can be taken to build public trust in data sharing initiatives, particularly in regions where privacy concerns may be prevalent?
Great, thank you for that question. I think that for users, the most important thing is that there's a lack of understanding. So there needs to be more transparency by companies and even by regulators that are trying to regulate or use their data. Users want to know what you're using their data for. If their data is safe with you, what you're doing to keep their data safe, what will happen if their data becomes unsafe? They want to know that you have everything covered. So there has to be a lot of transparency from companies and regulators, and there has to be a lot of education also, because if users are going to properly trust the system, they have to know exactly how the system works. For example, if you wanted to, there's something called if you wanted to stop a data processor from processing your data, there's something called automatic processing. If you use any means of technology to, like AI, for example, to automatically process data, then you can object to that under various laws in Africa, right? And if you object to that, that means that whoever is processing your data, fintech or bank, has to stop processing your data immediately. But if a user doesn't know that they have those rights, if they don't know that they can do that, if they don't know they have any redress mechanisms, then they're not going to trust the system, because how do they complain? If they opt in, how can they opt out? So there has to be a lot of transparency. There has to be a lot of education. Transparency could also include your privacy policies. It would be great if financial institutions also had detailed privacy sections to show, okay, this is what we're doing with your data. This is how we're protecting your data. Our security, cybersecurity, everything is up to date. If you have any question, FAQs are here. If people did that, if there was that sort of education and transparency, I think that users would not have a problem trusting institutions with their data. I think many people, particularly in Africa, just don't understand, what the data is, how you're using it, why you're storing it, and if it is safe. So I think those two things would really help.
Yeah, great. And so where can people go in terms of resources to learn about how their data is used, how it is shared, what rights they have in order to protect their data?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. Unfortunately, in Africa, we don't have a lot of resources yet. So the primary places that people would want to go to get that information is the laws. You have to read the laws, you have to read the regulations. There are a few data protection blogs or technology blogs that carry articles on data protection. Whenever there's a new law out, they give you a summary of your rights and what the law says. But there still needs to be more work around that, because not everybody's going to want to read a full law. Not everybody's going to want to read a blog post. They need to be short, pictorial explanations, just so that the everyday man who is scrolling maybe through Twitter or Instagram can understand what's going on in 5 seconds. If not everything, just on one specific topic, they can look at it and understand, okay, this is what they're doing with my data, move on. Maybe tomorrow something else comes in. So there needs to be more education. There needs to be more resources. As of now, the primary resources we have are the laws themselves, and maybe any articles or blog posts explaining the laws themselves. That's it, really.
Thank you so much, Ilamosi, very eloquently put. Saruni, so I'm curious about, in terms of your experience in Kenya, so how can financial institutions ensure that data sharing initiatives are inclusive and accessible to underserved populations, including those in remote or low-income areas?
Yeah, I think the easiest and most straightforward answer to that is data sharing. So, which of course has its own issues on the other end. But let's assume all of that is solved and now we can share data well. So I think the one thing that would be, so there's this thing that I actually last year while I was at MWC Kigali, MTN came on stage and they talked about how they had this idea of building a database and then building an API on top of this database. So the database was simply turning, all the KYC data that they've collected as a telco into an API that would allow financial institutions to tap into it, and hence just turning them essentially into an ID verification startup. And I thought this was a brilliant idea because one, the telcos themselves, and we have Safaricom in Kenya as well, which is just as big as MTN in some countries. Well, they do collect, I would say, a very enhanced KYC data. Because, for instance, if you're to register a SIM card, where it's required by law in Kenya for you to actually register a SIM card physically, it means I would go to a Safaricom shop, buy the SIM card, I would present my national identity card or a passport, and then a photo of B would actually be taken. So it's literally like a liveness check, but now in this case, it's physically. So you can imagine they have this data whereby they know that Saruni actually exists. You know, it's not, Saruni is not someone else, not pretending to be someone else. Saruni is Saruni. So if they could turn this into a simple database that anyone else could actually, you know, be able to, you know, do a quick API call just to verify. So you can imagine, for example, guys like Verify Me, whereby there is the first level of verification where a user uploads their photo and uploads their ID. And then instead of having to go and do the check with the government database, where if cases like Nigeria and Kenya, where we actually do have government databases that we can verify with, that would actually work. But now imagine in countries whereby we still don't have that, you get. So in this case, it would be very simple whereby they would tap into that kind of a database and be able to verify, okay, so what MTN has and what we have actually works, what Safaricom has and what we have do match. So we can actually say with some good confidence that this user actually is who they say. So I think to directly answer your question, the number one thing is that there needs to be communication and data sharing with this kind of, I would say, I don't want to call them government agencies themselves, but I also want to say, like, with the legacy telcos that do a lot of data collection in terms of ID and all of that, you know, if there was a way for them to share data with operators and players like ourselves and other fintechs as well, it would definitely be more inclusive. Because in this case, let's actually just do a simple example. For you to verify on an app like Flutterwave Send app, right? You have to take a photo of yourself, you have to take a photo of your ID. What does that mean? You actually need to have a smartphone, right? And that is what a lot of their fintechs actually do. You know, they assume that, okay, we're going to target the people with the smartphones, because rightfully so, when you look at the business side, that's where the money is. But then again, we are always going shouting, oh, when we're raising funds, we'll be like, oh, financial inclusion, you know, we're bringing more people on board. But the reality on the ground is we're just looking at a very small percentage. We're still leaving quite a lot of people out who are using feature phones, which is still the majority type of mobile phone within the continent. And we've seen some startups come up with ways of saying, okay, we're going to build a USSD wallet and all of that. But then again, there's still the issue of how do we verify? So here's an idea that I have. How about if we could have like a form of USSD verification, whereby I simply dial a USSD, put in my ID number, and because we have a partnership with a telco, let's say Safaricom in the Kenyan context, so we have a partnership with the telco would be able to pinpoint that, okay, this phone number is the one that has dialed this USSD, and we have this ID. So we could potentially say, okay, we have the first layer of identification of who this person is. And then right now, because we also have mobile money, we do require you to put in a secure PIN to verify a mobile money, or rather to process a mobile money transaction. So the idea here is, if we could also ping that same PIN, which essentially should only be known to the owner of the phone. So ping it and let the owner actually put in the PIN itself. And then now that would be like an added, like 2FA for USSD, whereby, oh, okay, so we have your ID and you've put in your secure PIN. So now we can assume that this is you. Of course, it's not 100% proof. It's just a raw idea. So there's people like, you know, SCJ who will go build on top of such kind of ideas.
Hey, I just want to say that we are providing that solution. So you know, Corey, we do provide USSD verification options, which rely on 2FA using phone number. So hey, everyone who's listening, go ahead and call us. We can help you. But thank you very much.
Yeah, perfectly. Actually, I think that is it. That's the only thing I would say, because what we leave out is the USSD users. So we need to really think of them. And I would also talk directly to any creators, any product guys, you know, anyone who's building any kind of startup. It doesn't have to be fintech. If you do require to have your users and actually be inclusive, I'm so obsessed with financial inclusivity, but being inclusive in any way, always remember to take care of your USSD users, because those are the majority. Yep.
Thank you very much, Sarani, very eloquently put. And thank you, Esige, for signaling that that's a solution that you are working on. So this leads me to open finance and open banking. Adedeji, your work you do very critical work in this space. And so I'd like to know from you, what are the biggest concerns and challenges with building Africa's open finance infrastructure? And this is one area where privacy is critical and people's suspicions are going to just go through the roof. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, thanks so much, right? I think for the biggest challenge I would say would be, well, it's not regulation. I think it's just the industry and everybody not realizing how big this could be, how much problem it solves, right? And I will explain, sometimes when you have small money, right, you're happy, and then you just chill because you don't know that you could actually get a whole lot more. So when you look at, for example, when you look at Nigeria, that is very big with payments, right? All that didn't happen because identity wasn't done. If anybody knew payments in Nigeria could be this big before identity, maybe we are putting so much effort without having to wait for banks to have to build BVN for themselves, right? Now, that BVN kind of created a role or removed the friction to allow a lot of things to happen. So when you talk about open banking or open finance, right, it's bigger than this. Probably we haven't scratched up to 1% of potential possibilities. And that, because of that lack of understanding or the lack of the potential, right, not understanding the potential, there's a kind of apathy with different areas. So you see banks on one side, they're just waiting for regulators, right? Regulators on the other side, maybe they have some other things to deal with, right? Because nobody understands the potential. And it's even interesting that even as slow as we think Nigeria's own is, right? The 53 other African countries are not even making any move at all. In fact, if you stroll into some other places and ask them about open anything, they're just looking at you like, what are you talking about? So if Nigeria that is supposed to be leading is still not there and the other countries are not moving, you can see how much money we are leaving on the table. But because what open banking does is it removes the friction. Everybody speaks the same language. So today we get on the web and we're browsing. What most people don't know is that before HTTP came around, before we have common HTML and internet standard, we used to have AOL, we used to have Microsoft Online and some other legacy standalone networks that were doing the same thing that internet was doing. But because they weren't speaking to each other, right? That explosion, that ability for things to just quickly connect with each other and to explode, right, didn't happen at all. But once the internet came around and everybody was on the same standard, everything changed significantly. Now, what will open banking do? It's not like it's going to suddenly put money in people's pocket, but it's actually going to remove friction and it's going to increase velocity. Now, everybody does, well, if you've been an engineer, you know fully well that once you remove friction and increase velocity, magic starts to happen. Then you're able to do a whole lot more. We talk about financial inclusion. It means anybody can easily open an account for anybody, anytime. You could do your transactions. You literally could do payment as a service. 10 years ago, we used to talk about IoT, Internet of Things. Nobody talks about IoT anymore. You know why? Because IoT became so successful that you don't even care. Your doors have internet, your cameras have internet, your cars have internet, everything has internet. So Internet of Things. So what you're going to just app then is you're going to have payment of things. Payments will be embedded in every single thing. And this will be micro payment being paid for. You're watching a movie for 10 minutes, you pay for those 10 minutes and you move on. You passing a toll, your card can instantly connect to the toll and make payment for maybe the number of kilometers you've driven. Everything's just going to be embedded because payment is like internet, is a fabric of the society. So I feel like this is a challenge, but I also know that it took years before the internet became a thing, right? Internet was invented in around between 69 and 72. People started sending emails in 1972. This thing didn't become mainstream until like 20 years after. So maybe like early 90s. And then internet became a big deal like 94, 95. So maybe it's going to take that long for it to become a big deal. But once we get there, it becomes something we can stop. So we're talking about identity for a long time. Everybody, at least let's say we know how many attempts Nigeria made to do identity. Even a minister went to jail because of this identity issue. Then CBN came around and the bank, they created BVN. I remember when we started then, when BVN launched in October 2014, it wasn't having traction. See, the CBN governor then called all the bank CEOs and said, all the senior people in banks, if they don't do their BVN by a particular day, they're going to be fired. So all of us, we marched downstairs to our bank, and we did it. Then it became a thing. And today, BVN is everywhere. Everybody struggles with it. So I feel like once somebody does it right, and we're almost there in Nigeria, and they say they promise and they say everything working, then it's just going to become a thing. And when we start with open banking, which is just basically allowing customers to provide consent so that their data and their account can be controlled by other entities, people will just start taking that same consent and be adding telcos to it, adding the capital market to it, insurance, they keep doing all that. And one day we just look back and wonder, oh, what were we fretting about? But I think it's going to happen.
Yeah. And that's very hopeful, and that's very hopeful to hear. Esige, I'm just going to come to you with my very last question before I take the Q&A for the audience. So tomorrow is World Identity Day. Happy World Identity Day, everyone. So can you highlight for me some of the broader societal and economic implications of establishing a legal identity for all individuals in Africa?
Yeah, no, so for me, and let's take the economic one first, and we've talked a lot about the economic one. So what does a legal identity do for us? Because, when we say legal identity, all the things that are embedded in that are, AML compliance, all the general standards for you to have a certain amount of trust that that person is who they say they are. And from an economic perspective, we think it's the first step to even open finance. So as you look at that layer, it's really about identity, payments, data as a science and as a service, and of course, Deji talks a lot about lending, which that's that layer of data as a service, and really AI really unlocks. And when you now unlock that $120 billion credit lending gap, right, that even DJ has written about, these are really the steps to get there. So it's the foundation of what we're going to do to build any type of open economy for ourselves. And it also has security implications, as well, digital sovereignty implications. So that's just one aspect. And when you look at the social one, I really, really love it, and particularly on our end, because we really see the individual empowerment and individual self-determination aspect to it. Just for example, rather than ask somebody for 10,000 naira, for many people who are, economically challenged, they can maybe get a microcredit loan for themselves. They don't have to depend on people and ask for people, because they have that digital identity now that they can be included in certain ecosystems for lending. Being able to get digital services, get their own phone, without having to go to somebody to say, okay, you're my guarantor because this institution doesn't know me. So there's really an individual self-empowerment to it that I think is going to unlock a lot of other things for us as we go into the future as well in Africa.
Thank you so much, Esige. So just as a quick reminder to our wonderful audience in the chat room, please, you can continue to drop your questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat room, in the Q&A box, and I'll pick them and we'll discuss them before the session wraps up. So so I have some questions here from that the audience has sent in. And also, as another reminder, you're going to see a poll launched. So this is for our audience in the chat room. You're going to see a poll launched on your screen. Please do well to answer the questions in the poll. And also, as we continue to have the Q&A, you're going to also see a post-event survey. Would like to know what you think about this event, how you feel, and what you gained from it. Thank you very much. So for the questions, so now this is for everyone on the panel. So what are the effects of the culture of secrecy in data collection and sharing? I'm just going to begin with you, Ilamusi.
I was still writing down the question. Sorry, what did you say? What are the effects of the culture of secrecy?
Yes. What
in
are the
data protection and
effects?
privacy?
Exactly, yes.
Well, practically speaking, I think that the biggest problem is that data subjects falsify information. I think that because of a need to protect themselves, I was doing some research on this very recently about how Africa's whether there was any data protection in Africa basically before the laws came in. And I was saying that I theorized rather that data protection in Africa used to be based on secrecy. People did not reveal things to other people that they felt were embarrassing. So yes, we have a communal culture. Everybody should know as much as possible so that we can help each other out. But if anything was considered to be embarrassing or shameful, people would typically conceal that. In these days, that still happens. But I think that for banking specifically, if people think that information could be used against them or is something that they want to keep private, like their address, for example, just like Sarami mentioned, people might lie about that because they're thinking, oh, what if they come to my house? What's going to happen then? So I think that that's how the culture of secrecy merges with data protection and maybe banking and finance as we have it today. People lie just because they feel like they conceal information because they feel like the information should not be made available to the people they are making it available to. They're concerned about the risks in revealing such information. And like I mentioned before, a lot of education and awareness could change these mindsets. If we show them, look, nobody else is seeing this. This is for your own protection. This is for your own information. It's for you, basically. I think that we could change mindsets around that. I hope I've been able to answer your question.
Yes,
well.
you have indeed. Saruni, what are the effects of the culture of secrecy in data collection and sharing?
Funny that you should mention that because I thought this culture of secrecy was only in Kenya, but it seems like it's an African thing. I think the biggest issue and challenge is that we are very skeptical, and in terms of the skepticism goes in terms of I really don't trust the institution I'm giving my information to. So I'm going to give you an example, and I hope this doesn't land me in trouble with my bank, but the address that my bank has is my old address. Yes, it was a real address, but it's my old address. And even after I changed the address, I didn't even bother changing the address on the bank side. Not because I was trying to keep it a secret, but because I didn't see the importance of it. And that's the other aspect of it. Even when I'm not trying to keep something a secret, I still don't understand. And this ties into what Ilamosi actually mentioned earlier on, whereby we lack a lot of education in terms of, okay, why is this data being collected? What's the benefit of this data being collected? So in this case, as someone who understands a bit of data privacy and a bit of why we need to collect this kind of data, I still don't see the benefit of the bank having my actual address today because, again, they've not communicated to me why they need that. So that ties in, as much as it's not really the secrecy part of it, that ties in to the current situation because now I'm acting as a customer, I'm not an operator, I'm thinking as a customer. And there's many more of us, literally. There's so many people who would even go to the extent of writing the neighbor's address just because they're thinking, what if I give them this address and the day I default on my loan, they show up at my door? So I'm not going to give them my address.
Well, there you have the reason for them wanting. Yeah, because I mean, I've changed addresses twice, and sometimes I'm never quite sure which address the bank has. And if I'm in the middle of a transaction, I'm like, which address is actually tied to my card, and I have to do some guesswork around that. So this question is for you, Adedeji. So someone is asking, what do you think are the main reasons Nigerian banks are not adopting open banking faster, and how can we change this?
Oh, okay. I think the problem isn't with the Nigerian banks actually, because banks can't adopt open banking without regulation.
Okay.
So the issue is actually between maybe the industry, and we just need to move faster. I'm talking about CBN, but they have a lot of things on their plates. If CBN comes tomorrow and says, let's start open banking tomorrow, the banks have nothing to do but to get ready. Now, but then in fairness to CBN as well, you have a lot to do. So you just have to prioritize. But I think we should do it faster. The banks are not the one delaying open banking because they can't, no matter how much they like open banking, they can't implement it without CBN approval.
Okay. Right. And someone wants to know what measures have been put in place to ensure that data processors don't tamper with critical customer data entrusted in their hands? Isige, I'd love to hear from you here.
So of course, the measure the government has put in place is that we are licensed by, different government agencies, depending on the identity endpoints that we are providing to a private sector. And under those licenses, there's always regulation in terms of compliance, right? And use cases. So the first thing is, as part of the regulation, generally, all your use cases include the individual requesting a service. So there's no selling of data. As you can see, in the past, there have been many fines by NITA for some processor irregularities or maybe some misuse of data by some operators, maybe not even in my sector. And all you can do in most times is to have the proper regulation and the proper enforcement. This is what's going to bring these cases to a minimum. But all over the world, every once in a while, albeit maybe every 20 years, there might be an issue. But what I would say is, the government does try to put compliance in place. Now, of course, it's not perfect. And we continue to engage. So, for example, with certain endpoints, you may have a proliferation because more people have the access to the endpoints than they should. So what happens is, you have a situation where government itself needs to tighten who has access to its data, and it's not even, the risk may not be the data processes, but may actually just be who even has access to the main database and the main system in the first place. And these are some of the things that need to be looked at.
Yeah, thank you so much, Isige. So I have this question from Anne Gitao, and I'm going to split it between Saruni and Ilamosi. So Africa has a diverse regulatory landscape when it comes to data protection and financial services. Could you share insights on best practices or potential harmonization efforts that can facilitate cross-border data sharing for the benefit of financial inclusion while respecting the sovereignty of individual nations? That was a long question. So basically, how can we harmonize these regulations while respecting the sovereignty of respective nations?
I can go first, but I feel like I've been doing that a lot. Sorry, do you want to go first?
I was actually going to say, let the expert go first, because wow.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. In terms of what is currently being done, I can off the top of my head name maybe 2 initiatives across the continent that are seeking to harmonize data protection laws. The first one is the Malabo Convention. And the problem with this is that it is not binding upon the member states. It's very suggestive. So and it's guiding principles, really. There are no strict enforcement rules that governments have to follow. So they just say, oh, you should maybe try and do this. So if we're going to have the sort of harmonization we want, we need a regional document that is a bit stricter. And the second thing I could point to is the AFCFTA. I know that there are currently protocols being developed for cross-border data flows, or I think that they have been developed already. But again, we have the same problem. Because of the sovereignty of these nations, the documents are very loosely binding. They don't really impose obligations upon member states. So I think that going forward, if we really want to push for harmonization, unfortunately, there has to be international cooperation. States have to come to the table knowing that we have to do this to protect our citizens, and we have to compromise on something. We have to reach an agreement. I think there has to be consensus on that. And then the agreement has to be reached. And because of how international law works, it has to be domesticated and implemented in the various states. So international cooperation is the only way forward, unfortunately. I think that what we can do as citizens, as people within the space, is to get in touch with regulators. So whoever is regulating data protection in your country, I think should get in touch with them. That's the first step, because if the regulator knows what to do, because that's their area of expertise, then they can communicate to the government, whoever is sitting at those tables, or if they're in the room themselves, they can communicate what needs to be done. So if the regulators have a good understanding of what the citizens' needs are, that can now be passed along up and up the chain until it gets to the table where it needs to be discussed. So international cooperation, unfortunately, is the only way forward I see.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ilamosi. Sarani, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just say it in a different way because she said, literally everything. And I'll just say, yeah, we need to talk to each other. That's literally the only way.
All right. Yeah, thank you. So Adedeji, there's a question here for you, and it's from Toby. So it says, hi Adedeji, you mentioned what an open banking standard could do for Africa, like what HTTP did for the internet. Do you think current players in this space change or update APIs too frequently?
No, I don't think they operate too frequently. And I feel like since the standard hasn't been built, people haven't actually seen what it's going to do, right? But when it comes, it becomes like the way you do proper internet RFC standards. Nobody changes internet ratified standards anyhow, right? Usually goes through ratification, takes like a couple of years. And it means that a lot of people come to the table and look at things from different point of view. When that is done, all the local and legacy and proprietary standards will all disappear. Nobody will use that anymore, right? So that's what's going to happen then. And what it means for you, either as a startup, as a developer, as a product person, means that if you build a product in Nigeria or you build a product in, let's say, Ethiopia, for example, using type of APIs, when you get to Zambia, it's probably going to work. Now, of course, obviously, there may be different business rules and local regulations that may affect how the product works. But from a technical point of view, it's always going to be, that will not be your problem anymore. So today, if I'm building a website, I'm not worried about what browser somebody's using in Ethiopia, right? Or in Western Sahara, because I know that as long as you're using a browser, you're going to see my website. But it doesn't mean you sign up for my product, but at least that problem isn't something that is bothering me. And that's what open banking and open finance will be. So it means that even though the fact that you built your application on open banking standards, it doesn't mean that if Lamosi comes, for example, and she shows up in another country, she will be allowed to open an account because the laws there may not allow her to do that. But technically, the application will work.
Thank you very much, Adedeji. Saruni, I'm going to come to you with this question. So this is about debt recovery, because you talked about banks knowing your address. So I feel like you're going to have a lot of insight into this question. So it says that, how do we infuse data sharing as a means to reduce the stigma of unethical debt recovery? And the person goes on to say that we have seen posts online where recovery agents representing lenders harass customers who have defaulted in paying back their loans. So basically, while people are sharing their data, they're also worried about how it can be used to harass and attack them if they are defaulting on their loans. So how do we control for that, or how do we assuage people's fears around this?
Yeah, so first of all, to clear out any assumptions, I've never run away with anyone's money, including the bank. That's not the reason why I need to update my address. But yeah, to answer that, this is definitely a behavior that we've also seen in Kenya. And actually, it was the first mandate that our data protection agency actually came in and tried to basically, cane. I will actually use the word cane the perpetrators, because we've seen lots and lots of complaints. Either they are accessing your contact list and then calling random people or texting random people in your contact list, asking them to tell you to pay your debt, shaming you on social media, going to the extent of just doing some unscrupulous methods just to try and do debt collection. So I think in this case, instead of looking at it from the consumer side, I think it's up to, the player's side to actually behave in an orthodox manner and not try and, do some very weird things and crazy things, if I may call them that, just to try and get back a few coins here and there. So I'll give you an example. I've seen a screenshot of someone who was claiming that they had received over 200 calls from a debt collector on behalf of someone else. So it's not their debt, it's on behalf of someone else, and threatening messages as well. Now the debt collector is now threatening them that they will do things to them on behalf of this person unless they tell this other person to pay. And all of this was for an amount that was, I think, 1,600 Kenya shillings, which translates to around $10 right now with today's exchange rate. So $10, $12. So you can imagine going through all those, all that just for such kind of an amount. So I think in this case, for the Kenyan context, the regulator did come in to try and bring sanity into the space. So in terms of the players, in this case, I think it's the players who actually need to behave themselves. There's better ways for us to be able to collect debt. When you're even doing credit scoring, make sure that whoever you're credit scoring, you are able to take the risk and know that, okay, person X, I'm going to give them X amount of credit, and there's chances, always give it a 50-50 chance. There's chances that this person will decide to, deep with my money. There's another chance that they may decide to pay. And even when they don't pay, I think we can also employ some methods that are not discriminating, because these discriminatory methods are what now make consumers become smart. So the next time this person was discriminated, when they're taking another different loan or applying for credit, they're probably not going to use correct data. They're probably not going to give the correct address or the correct phone number. So it's a two-edged sword, but I think on the first side, it's the players who actually need to behave themselves and come up with better debt collection methods, and then the customers will also act accordingly.
Thank you very
If
much.
I can add just one thing to that, I just want to say, I think some of these cases are extreme. Of course, like you mentioned, Surumi, I mean, really harassing the guarantor. But let me tell you this, right, is that also private sector is put in a very, very tough situation, right? There is no regulation. So you can literally take a loan, right, not pay, right? And the enforcement, right, after you don't pay, in terms of, and what the government has put in place for it to be reported is so mediocre, right? And then the fact that you now have multiple types of ID where you can basically take one loan on your NIN and one on your BVN makes it even more difficult. This is why harmonization is important, right? So it's almost like the industry, right, has been left on their own to resolve their own collection problems, right? So, and it happens everywhere, right? So, for example, even the landlord tenant, even the job in many places, you're required to do a background check. And just even going to an example of, why should I give my address? I just want to say, right, everywhere around the world, is not just in Africa, people generally don't give the right information unless there's enforcement. But I can tell you that most countries, right, if you get a letter from the court, right, first of all, and there's a fee and it doubles, right, basically, if you have not changed your address, this is by regulation with your local MVA, right? In 30 days, it's even illegal not to do it in 30 days. It's your problem. If you get a ticket and that ticket goes from £50 or $100 and goes to $500 because of interest, and they've been sending you at your at an old address, you haven't changed it. When you go to court, the judge, it's your fault for not changing your address. And we never look at regulation for the long game, right? To establish what happens in private sector. And a lot of this is because of the lack of regulation and lack of putting proper things in place, right? So that we can collect proper information, I think also.
Yeah, thank you very much. I agree very much, Isige. Just as a reminder, you're going to see, for those of us joining in the chat room, you're going to see a survey in the chat room. Please do fill the survey so that we know how you feel about this panel. Right. So I'm just going to ask one last question, Isige. Is there a world in which we can have identity verification without KYC? Someone wants to know.
Well, I mean, identity verification is one of the aspects of KYC, right? But when you look at KYC unlocks many things. But it's not just about knowing who somebody is. It's about knowing what they are and where they are. The way I see it potentially in the future, it could go two ways, is that identity is kind of embedded, right? And the real important information is the analytics. What other information can you have about the person to give them much more valuable services? And then the second way it can go actually is kind of like the decentralized identity, right? Where you use blockchain, or like what Deji said, in terms of building a kind of private sector unified ID on top of a government ID infrastructure. So it could go one of those ways. But in terms of no country, I don't think, is going to relinquish their opportunity to be the authoritative source of identity for their people, right? So is that going away? No, but it could take on different forms, embedded, included in decentralized finance, or built on top. We could see some of those different types of options.
Thank you very much. So we've come to the end of the Q&A section, which means that the panel is gradually winding to a close. So just before we do the last or the final things in our housekeeping, I just want to hear from everyone on the panel. What are your final thoughts on the subject? So we've discussed extensively the issue of data sharing, data capture, privacy concerns, regulatory fragmentation, and all of the issues that have, all of the problems that have cropped up due to all of these. And so I'd just like to hear from each and every one of you what your final thoughts on this are in terms of where we are and where we should be, just quite quickly. So I'm going to begin with Sarini.
All right, thank you so much. So first, I just say thank you so much to the Techable team for having us.
Yeah.
And really, it's been really an exciting conversation to have and very insightful. So on my part, I will be speaking to the fintech players and fintech operators and saying that we need to stop working in silos. While we have expectations for regulators and governments and saying, hey, you need to put in the frameworks and everything, and where we are saying we need a unified, regulatory framework, especially for data sharing, all that will not happen if there's no one to push for that. And the first group of people who would actually push for this is the fintech players themselves, because this benefits all of us. So the call here is we need to stop working in silos. We need to stop acting as if we are enemies of each other, that this fintech and this fintech, just because we are competing for the same customer base, then we should not talk to each other. Because imagine in a world whereby we had good practices, whereby we were sharing, of course, with the permission of our customers, we were sharing data with each other in the right way, and we were coming together to fight for unified, regulations that benefit the whole industry. So my call is to all fintech players that we need to actually come together and work as one and stop operating in silos and seeing each other as enemies all the time. In some cases, coming together helps us. In some cases, of course, hiding your next move is also a good thing.
Thank you very much, Sarini. So just before I go to everyone else, before I come to you, Esige, Adedeji, and Ilamusi, about your final remarks, we'll just quickly cue in Ngonya Kalango, who has a brief presentation for us from QoreID, and then we'll continue with the final remarks. Ngonya, are you ready?
Good afternoon. You hear me?
Hi, Ngonya.
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ngonya Kalango. I'm the head of sales here at QoreID. So I just came in to give closing remarks while we just share some of our slides with you. This has really been a fantastic session, I must say. It's been highly engaging. Before we just, go into everything, I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank our audience for joining us today and for their engagement throughout the session. We hope that they have found it insightful and also enjoyable. Thank you to our esteemed panelists for sharing your expertise with us. Your contributions have been invaluable. I believe we've all gained great knowledge on data sharing and financial inclusion. So I would love to keep the conversation going with our audience members. Want to demonstrate how You can harness QoreID solutions to streamline your onboarding and compliance processes. Our solutions, or our range of products, should I say, they go beyond identity. So we support customer profiling, digital addressing, fraud prevention, and much, much more. Really, the possibilities on what you can do with our platform is really endless. We're really excited to engage with you all one-on-one. We're happy to provide you with more information on our solutions and to discuss the multiple benefits our solutions can offer you. To schedule a demo with us, please visit us at www.QoreID.com. You can also reach out to us over email via sales@QoreID.com or contact@QoreID.com. We will drop all this information down in the chat as well, just so that you can have that available to you at a glance. And lastly, before I will let you go, I'd also like to thank the Tech Cabal team. They have been a consistent partner on this Inside Identity series over the years. Your dedication and expertise have greatly contributed to the success of this initiative. We look forward to continued success, on this series with you. So thank you everyone for your time. I look forward to speaking to you all on QoreID and how awesome we are. And of course, to hosting you on the next edition of Inside Identity. So enjoy the rest of your day, and back over to you, Kelechi.
Thank you very much, Ngonya. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Enjoy the rest of your day too. So we're just going to continue with the closing remarks, Ilamusi. Sorry, it looks like I shocked you by calling you. You're muted, I think.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to the panelists. It was a lovely conversation. And also thank you, Kelechi. And thank you to the Tech Cabal team generally. For final remarks, I'm going to say two things. First, to echo what Sarini said, but in different language. We need harmonization. It's absolutely crucial for the growth of the financial sector, as well as many other sectors that rely on data. The second thing I want to say is to the financial companies or institutions who are building these products and solutions that we're seeing. I think the one thing I want to say is that they should build privacy into their products from the beginning, because often we see that privacy is a final consideration after the product is done. So I would say that they should build privacy into their products, or consider privacy when they are building their products, so that, the ecosystem we're trying to create is something that eventually comes to fruition. That's it for me.
Thank you very much, Ilamusi. Adedeji. Final thoughts.
Yeah, so for me, I think digital ID is critical, and I know that it's going to unlock prosperity in Africa, because it will remove the friction by allowing people to being able to access services easily. Right. My take would just be like, pushing this back to SC and people similar to him, to, instead of fighting to, take over this thing. Okay, SC doesn't believe in that, but take over countries' identity, create smart ways to aggregate this thing and make it available in a very simple way. So if I come to SC, you should be able to find a way to digitally know me and know which of the underlying ID will be able to work. That would be a faster way to work, because working with governments and working to change to prove to people that, I can hold the ID, is going to be a tough sell. So I prefer a more practical solution. And when it comes to open banking, I know I don't think anybody's waiting for this thing much more than I've been on this thing for 6 years. I'll just say maybe 1 more year will be there, and then after a while we'll forget. It's just like the train that is running in Lagos, finally running after waiting for 15 years for it. One day, it's all going to be history, and Africa will have a more prosperous outcome for itself. Thank you.
Yeah, we really do hope so. Isigie.
Thank you, everyone. This was also, for me, an enlightening conversation. The first thing, for us at QoreID is that, we would love for the fintech ecosystem to engage and have conversations with us. While there's a lot of work to do, there are so many products in the fraud space, and in terms of data sharing. In fact, some of us local operators are now sharing data, so there's more advancement than we're aware of. But it's also, good for us to have the takeaway that we need to continue to be advocates in terms of and seeing our government as partners, and understanding that the regulation is there for us, because at the end of the day, it's our country. It's not really the government's country; it's our country. And so we have a right to participate and help shape future regulation. And it's something that we all really need to understand.
Thank you so much, Isige. And of course, we are the government, so it's all our country. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Saroni. Thank you, Sige. Thank you, Adedeji. Thank you, Lamosi. Thank you, especially Lamosi, for accepting our invitation very, very last minute. You just came on just yesterday evening and came so prepared and everything. And this was so enlightening. This was so interesting all around. Everyone shared their thoughts and their knowledge and their insight with our audience. And thank you so much for your time. We do not take this for granted. I just want to quickly just remind our audience to please fill our post-event survey. Tell us what you think. Tell us how you feel about the Inside Identity series. Would love to hear from you. And just as a final reminder that this conversation was brought to you by Tech Cabal Insights and QoreID. QoreID is a QoreID is a digital identity platform that makes it easier for businesses to connect to trusted identities and critical consumer analytics. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your knowledge. Thank you so much for sharing your insight and your experience with me and with our audience and our participants in the chat room. Thank you, Eniola Soshon, who moderated the chat room, and Bright, who was on the social media end of things. And also just to note everyone that TC Insights or Tech Cabal Insights is Tech Cabal's data research and intelligence unit, which provides actionable insights on actionable data on startups and the tech ecosystem across Africa to investors, entrepreneurs, big tech companies, regulators, and other players on and off the continent. So if you want to talk to us about anything involving data around startups and around the tech ecosystem, actionable data, please talk to Tech Cabal Insights. Also, subscribe to our daily newsletter, TC Daily, which is a daily roundup of the most important tech news in the ecosystem every day. Thanks everyone again for your time, and see you around. See you in the near future. Talk to you again soon. I hope that if we invite you, Ilamosi, Adedeji, Isigi, and Saroni, if we invite you again to talk to us about anything, data, or any other topics you're experts in, I hope you say yes to us. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Right.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy your weekend. Happy World Identity Day tomorrow. Find some way to celebrate. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.